Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Tips and Tools for Better Managing Lead Flow and Converting Sales. I'm Jason Feld, Director of the Entrepreneur Partner Studio. Our webinar today is presented by Dun and Bradstreet and Entrepreneur. We're going to dive into a topic today that many growing companies struggle with, navigating a sea of data and making sure your sales teams have the right information at the right time, empowering them with a much-needed competitive advantage. We have an all-star lineup of speakers for you today, so get ready for an informative, insightful conversation. Let's see, before we get started though, just want to encourage everyone, if you have questions, please submit them via the questions tab on your control panel at any point during the webinar. We're going to save 10 minutes or so at the very end for Q&A. Just so everyone is aware, yes, you will receive a follow-up email in a few days containing a link to the recording from this webinar. With those housekeeping notes out of the way, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator, business consultant, author, and longtime entrepreneur contributor, Peter Gasca. Peter, take it away.
All right, thanks, Jason. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to actually be here. We've got a great discussion ahead of us for the next hour or so. And I want to emphasize again the reason why we're here. We're here because, if you are a business and managing a business or managing a sales team, and you use data, you understand just how much data has changed, how much data has become available to us. If you do not currently use any kind of data to manage your business or your sales team, then it can be actually very intimidating. So much so that according to IBM, 90% of all data that has ever been created has been created in the last 2 years. And I went into this trail to find out if that was actually factual. And probably the more profound fact is that a lot of estimates believe that, or a lot of experts believe that every 2 years that becomes the case. So every 2 years we produce enough data to represent 90% of all data. So imagine the exponential growth in the amount of data that is available to us. It can be really intimidating. So what we're going to do today is we're going to use this opportunity to talk to two experts in the field who have been managing sales data, who have been applying it to their company and effectively creating strategies to create differentiation, create a differentiation between them and their competitors. And a couple of notes I want to reemphasize to Jason. I keep seeing attendees pop up. One is that this is going to be recorded and you'll receive a link. And secondly, this is a very broad topic and one that we could probably break into 2 or 3 separate webinars. So it's very likely that as we go through this, we might gloss over a term or gloss over a specific strategy, something that we don't dive deep enough into. I encourage you to please use the question in the section to your right or wherever your section is to mention it. And what will happen is I'm going to be receiving those questions as the moderator. I'll see if I can fit them in or save them to the end. And more importantly, if the question is not answered, then it will flag. It'll flag Entrepreneur, it'll flag our 2 speakers, and after this is done, they can follow up with you and actually answer those questions for you. So don't be shy. The majority, the best part of these webinars is typically the question and answer sheets at the end. So please don't be shy and answer those questions as they come up and don't forget about them. Okay, so here's what we're going to go over today. I'm going to do a quick introduction of our speakers, our 2 experts, and then we're going to dive into a brief discussion of some of the challenges that both of our experts have had in the past with their businesses to kind of connect with most of you so you understand what level we're starting off on. And then the vast majority of our discussion here is going to be talking about how to use data effectively, how to sort through it and apply it to your marketing strategy so that you can create a competitive advantage with your team. Hopefully that'll take us to about the 45 to 50-minute mark, and then again we will have we'll try to save as much time as we can toward the end for questions. So without further ado, let's do some introductions. First, just a little bit about me. My name is Peter Gasca. I have been working in business both in a corporate setting and as an entrepreneur, and most recently as a consultant for the past 20 years now. So I'm a little bit old school when it comes to business and sales. So I am as much of a participant in this webinar as all of you, because I'm very curious about how data is integrated into the sales offices. Because the last time I ran any kind of data-driven business was probably about 10 years ago. And when you think about just the change in 10 years and what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years, it's crazy to think about. So I want to stay ahead of it as well. So I'm excited for our 2 guests, because we have 2 great panelists today. Our first speaker is Michael Botler. He is the manager of sales and operations for Credly. Since joining Credly, he has leveraged his experience to create a winning sales strategy that leverages data. His ethos, which I love, is the fact that sales and revenue operations are dictated by the tool, and data is and should be and will be moving forward become an asset for all businesses. So how we manage our data is going to be a really important part moving forward. So welcome, Michael, and I want to turn it over to you for just a second. So you can tell us a little bit about what Credly does and for our viewers.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Credly is a platform that partners with various organizations to help their learners' achievements become recognized in a verifiable, shareable, and portable format. So what I mean by that is that if someone has a certification, instead of a paper or PDF certificate, you would now be able to, with our platform, be able to get a digital badge, so to speak, with metadata behind it, and it's verifiable on our platform, and you can you can share it amongst many other platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter.
Very cool, and I know that you've been using data and data tools, and I know you're probably dying to talk about it, but thank you for holding back so we can save it for later. Our next speaker, our next panelist is James Casola. James is actually the regional VP of sales for Dun and Bradstreet Sales and Marketing Solutions. He has a wealth of experience working with companies all sorts of sizes, both from small and medium companies to large enterprises. And today his team works to improve the business performance with data and analytics, specifically with Dun and Bradstreet. So James, welcome. And I think for a lot of the attendees, I think a lot of attendees have probably heard about Dun and Bradstreet, but Dun and Bradstreet is so much more than just Dun and Bradstreet. So can you tell us a little bit about your role there and a little bit more about Dun and Bradstreet for all of our viewers?
Sure. So Dun and Bradstreet has changed a little in the last year or two. So Dun & Bradstreet is not your father's D&B or your grandfather's or even your great-grandfather's. We're a 177-year-old business that in the last year has been taken private and are making incredible strides in data analytics and solutions to help businesses grow. And the old term of, hey, let's pull a D&B on somebody still exists today, but we're really so much more in attempting to help businesses really perfect their strategies to go to market and segment their customers.
Yeah, going back to when I was in grad school, I remember we used to use Hoovers, and I believe Hoovers is part of Dun and Bradstreet too, at the early edges of data and applying data to business decisions. So, you're right in the heart of this. So I'm really excited to hear some of your feedback moving forward. All right, so with that said, let's move on. Let's start off with some challenges. And the reason I want to talk about challenges specifically and not get right into solutions, because I think it's important for all of us to understand the challenges that come with managing data today. As James said, in the last 2 years, Dun and Bradstreet has changed, and just the market for applying data is changed rapidly in the last couple of years, and it's going to change rapidly. So I want to wrap our head around what type of challenges the companies are having these days, and maybe relate to some of our viewers. We're going to focus a little bit on data and the actual integrity and the quality of data and how we collect it, as well as errors and issues or challenges that clients are having or businesses are having applying this to a strategy. So I'm going to start with Michael. Michael, you come at it from a company level perspective. So can you talk about what issues you've dealt with over the course of your career in the past few years with Credly, and how have those problems evolved?
Sure. Over the past couple of years, we've dealt with a number of issues, just as any other organization or company would. With data, sometimes there's two different ways you can deal with it or have issues with it. You can either have incorrect data, which can come from a number of sources or way it gets into your system, or you could have, which is a different issue, missing data, which is a whole nother ballgame that, I think, many organizations deal with. Sometimes you want answers to a question, but you might not have the information to do that. We've evolved with this by, identifying what we specifically need as a company, and then, finding whether we should be looking for that internally or externally. We leverage tools and we leverage our internal, resources as well.
Awesome. Do you have any? Can you think of any specific cases where? Because again, I think the challenge I think a lot of us have outside who haven't been dealing with this much is just putting too much time and effort and getting stuck doing and trying to manage. But can you think of any specific cases that you've had where maybe where your team or a team that you have worked with has gotten basically held back from actually making any progress because there was too much stuff going on, or you had the wrong type of data? Anything specific case that you have?
Specifically, I mean, we've had, in other roles as well past, I know I've pulled, many reports and things like that where, there's historical data missing, right? And, I'm the one that has to be the bearer of bad news saying, sorry, unfortunately, I can't really answer that question that you asked, but because of practices that were not implemented early on, we didn't collect the right information from either customers or our internal employees, or we weren't, our CRM wasn't appended by any other tool. So yeah, there's been many cases. Specifically, I've worked with, marketing and sales, and sometimes recently we've implemented a couple new fields for our internal use, and when it's one of those moments that you go, hey, I wish we had this months ago or a year ago, but sometimes you just have to implement it immediately and start collecting that information. So
that's a great question. So would you say that if you have been collecting, if somebody has been collecting data and doing it inefficiently, would you recommend going back and trying to clean old data, or basically starting from scratch and going, listen, let's just start with the data that we're going to collect here and have a good strategy for that?
Well, I think you have to identify what you're looking for your outcomes first, right? And if you can effectively clean that data, then absolutely. But then it comes to the question of the time and effort it's going to take to clean that data. And sometimes if it's if it's either tens or hundreds of records, sure, that might be possible. But if it's gets to the thousands and tens of thousands of records, it might be a little bit more painstaking there, and it might require some other intervention, whether it's an external tool or another way of answering that question or questions you were looking for to get them for.
Gotcha. And we'll cover that. We'll cover that in the next coming slides too. So, James, I want to move over to you. You come at this from a much 30,000-foot level by working with numerous different clients from multiple different industries. When it comes to managing data and effectively applying it to a strategy, do you see any common or shared issues across most of the companies or industries that you work with?
Sure. So, what I've really found is that many companies kind of skip steps, okay? And they start throwing out, companies that they think that they should be selling to, or markets they should be selling to, but they're not really basing it on anything other than, wow, this company probably looks like a good fit. And what they're really missing is the analysis and identification of who their ideal customers really are based on who their customers are now. Taking information about who you're selling to now, applying some data such as company size, geography, industry, things like that can help you more effectively target businesses. And in today's world, we are targeting omni-channel. So the days of either just direct mail or email or phone calls have now morphed into programmatic campaigns using social, and there are many different strategies that can be deployed in the market. But if you're targeting the wrong businesses, no strategy is going to work.
All right, and while I've got you, James, and I'll come back to Michael on this question too, so you can think about it. I don't know if there's an answer to this, but I think we can all probably look out to the short-term future, maybe mid-term future, and see what kind of challenges we're going to have. But are there any? What do you think are the biggest challenges companies are going to have when it comes to integrating data into their sales teams in the future? And I'll start with James on that one.
Sure. So there's a couple different things. So first are data silos, right? So the data housed in multiple systems. The second is if you have an effective strategy for making sure that data is clean and actionable at all times. At the rate you're acquiring new information, for instance, we have many organizations that drive their business off of web activity and web forms. Well, I think as we all know, we've seen some web forms that are some really poor quality, or the information is indecipherable or incorrect. Well, if you keep on collecting web forms at a rate of hundreds a day or thousands a month, and you keep on taking that data and put it into a clean pool, then you're just going to keep on ending up with a dirty pool of data. So, there are ways to operationalize the intake of data so that you never have that issue.
Yeah, I got you. Michael, anything to add to that?
No, those are great answers. Yeah, I mean, I just think one more thing to add on was just that having specific goals or outcomes in mind of what you want to get from the data is just something that we and I harp on quite a bit, because collecting all the data in the world can be fine, but if you can't say what you're looking for at the end of the day, then what are you going to do with the data?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess the equivalent would be I as a personal anecdote, I tried to play golf right away, and if I would have taken a lesson or two, I probably would have been better. So the lesson might be, the takeaway here is there really has to be some effort put into planning before you launch into this, because if you don't, you can get buried quickly and really actually make it a hindrance more than a competitive advantage. So okay, well, let's move on. So I think again, and I'm relating to what you're saying considerably. So I got to imagine a lot of the people that are tuning in are also. So there we go. Yeah. So let's talk about what that means, like what we're actually doing. How do we overcome these problems and making sure that we are not getting inundated? I want to share a quick slide that I found very interesting. I think that I'm hearing, a lot of people probably relating to the fact that, maybe they've got a ton of data. They don't know how to set their web form. They don't know how to collect properly. And you know what, again, it can be really inundating and it can be intimidating. So there's probably a lot of people going, you know what, I'm just going to go back to the old school way of doing it. It worked for me for the last 10 or 15 years. How much different can it be? And what I love about this webinar and this discussion is that, you can do that. But the people, according to a Forrester Consulting report, the teams that are actually taking data and effectively putting a strategy in place, collecting it, cleaning it, and applying it, are seeing huge impacts. 73% faster sales speed cycle, 73% return on marketing spend, and probably, as we all know, because clients, the most expensive thing is acquiring new clients. So 77% is 77% increases in customer loyalty and retention. So those numbers are huge. And I think they speak well to the fact that this is why this is important these days. So it's not a matter of staying ahead of it. You almost have to do it now just to make it a competitive advantage. So for our next step, going into some of the tips and other aspects, I'm going to start with James, because James, over at Dun and Bradstreet, you and your teams look at everything from a very holistic standpoint, which I think is where you need to start, not looking at things specifically. And you implement what I think you call the wheel over at Dun and Bradstreet, which I think is a great place to start. So can you tell us a little bit about the wheel and how you apply it to your teams?
Sure. So, over time, there have been many models, many go-to-market strategies. In order to remain consistent, sales and marketing really need to come together, and that's really been missing from sales strategies of the past. Typically, sales tries to target a bunch of companies. Marketing, coordinate some efforts for offers, and try to drive leads to sales. And sales, why aren't you closing? And marketing, why are you not giving me great leads? So times have changed, and just pure product selling has kind of gone out the window. So the way we look at the environment is, how does data work within the systems that you have today? So companies are spending thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars on tools such as CRM, such as marketing automation platforms. And frankly, if D&B does not work inside that environment, then we're not doing our job, okay? So as we think about how D&B works with businesses, we look at the buyer's journey from a wheel perspective. And this is a cycle that's a continuous cycle with, going back to, a couple minutes ago, is who are my customers? Who are my prospects? How do I take a look at the best segments that I'm selling into? What is my go-to-market strategy going to be based on the first-party data that I have, the data that's within my walls, and blend that data with third-party information coming from a business like D&B. Once we have that, how do we empower that data? How do we target appropriately across channels? So for large accounts, maybe we have an ABM strategy. Maybe we use account-based marketing to really dig in and target the appropriate companies and contacts that are going to drive our business. How do I empower?
Can you explain what ABM stands for?
Sure. The ABM is account-based marketing. Okay. So once we find the businesses and industries that we want to target, we employ a strategy to find lookalikes that are just like our best accounts. And using information from D&B, you can target the appropriate companies and contacts with your offering, and have make sure you're doing it consistently in both offline and online media with broad reach. So this is part of the never-ending journey of trying to align marketing and sales together for success in the future, because they work hand in hand. As noted in many studies, buyers do not engage with an organization. Sometimes they've done 65 to 85% of the research on their own online, which is why it's so important for sales and marketing to be in tune, because sales needs to be able to pick up where marketing leaves off in the buyer's journey.
Yeah, I think that's always been a big issue, is that platform, or that cross-functional element of businesses there. So so I think that's awesome. That's awesome, because looking at it from a holistic standpoint, I think goes back to what we were just talking about, is really important, because if you look at it in the silos, not just from data silos, but silos as in functionality of the business, it can be a real hindrance. So what I want to get into now is a little bit more specifically, these issues that we've had about creating the challenges that businesses had, creating this holistic view of it. It kind of all starts with making sure that your data is accurate. So I'm gonna turn this over to Michael for just a minute. Now you've done an incredible job over at Credly. You had some great results, getting in there and actually getting control of your data, which has really helped to empower your sales team. So can you explain, first of all, maybe for those who, it's fairly self-explanatory, the ideal customer profile, but maybe how you define what an ideal customer profile, and more how you have been able to, really refine this for Credly.
Yeah, we look at an ideal customer profile very similarly to most other organizations. Just essentially, who's our current client, how are they using our products or services, and who are similarly in those either industries or verticals. And how can we reach them as well and provide, provide our services or products to them, and the best way that we can. We've previously, the way we got around that and, kind of got a management on our data is a couple of ways. We identified what was really important to us in our internally. That's going to all the data and information that we had already collected, in various methods. And then we kind of also looked at, how can we improve upon that? And I found throughout my careers, reducing subjectivity in data. For example, you can have person A and person B, and they can have, both great experiences in careers, and they can have opinions on what, something is, or where an organization lies in a certain industry. But ultimately, there has to be one answer. And that's kind of where we've relied on, D&B tools to help us, provide that extra information, that solid known facts. That way we can leverage that into really expanding and digging deep into the ideal customer profile.
So, I mean, that's okay. So I kind of want to dive into that just a tad bit.
Sure.
When you talk about reducing subjectivity, I think that's really key, right? Because there's a lot of data points that are very similar, and you could break your data down into 100 different categories. You can break them down into 5 different categories. Generally speaking, Credly, you probably don't want to tell us specifically what you guys do, but how would a business decide, or can you help them how to decide, how in depth they want to really break down their profile of each of their customers?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to reducing subjectivity, you get to look at, how and where your information is coming from, right? How is it getting into your system? Is it manual input? Is it mass upload? Or is it through a tool or some other way? And where is it coming from? Again, is it, somebody like as a sales rep putting it in? Is it, a tool automatically importing it? Yeah, so that's definitely in there. I'm sorry, can you repeat the second part of that as well?
Yeah, well, so what, okay, I'll just pretend like I'm a friend of yours, right? And I've got a bunch of data, and I totally could break it down into 50 different areas to analyze it and find trends.
Sure.
But I feel like that's overwhelming. 5 doesn't seem like enough. What would you tell somebody to how to break down that data?
I say go broad, right? Go broad first. Like we've looked at different aspects of our data in many different ways, and we've always found that going broad, whether it's take an example of verticalizing industries, right? Going broad is the easiest thing to do first, because you have a lot of information, and then you can, let's say, maybe break your verticals down into 5 buckets, right? It's not 25, it's 5, and you can lump a ton of industries into 5 different buckets, and then you can go from there and break them down into subcategories and sectors and everything like that. So I think sometimes it's overwhelming, and people think they need to get very specific very quickly, but the best way to start, I believe, is just being broad and saying, okay, what are we looking at here? And then you can start to get a little more granular the more comfortable you get.
Gotcha. I love that, actually, because I would be the type of person who would dive into 50 different data points, or 50 different areas to try to figure it out. So what I'm hearing is if you look at it, first of all, by looking at your past data and going like really identify the who your client is, looking at that from a broad perspective, and then specifically looking at how they use your product or your service, and then looking at the verticals, meaning looking at different areas up and down. Either when you say verticals, are you looking at verticals within the organization or verticals within the industry?
However you define it. Let's say verticals within your organization. So that could be a multitude of industries under one vertical.
I gotcha. Okay, so looking at a particular client that you've had success with, and looking at other very similar companies kind of up and down the post, up and down in the organization to see if there's other uses for your service, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on to James. James, now you have worked with a lot of different companies, and you're helping them clean their data, effectively manage their data, create these ideal customer profiles. And of course, Dun and Bradstreet has these tools available, but have you found any other tools or any other strategies to help that companies have used to effectively, manage and clean and create data that is usable?
Well, I mean, that's what we're doing every day, right? So, we have, come across companies that have hundreds of customers. We have customers that have thousands of customers. We have companies that we work with that are in B2B, B2C, and both. So, as an example, one of the challenges that some businesses have that are in the both B2B and B2C market is their customers or their prospects, how they interact with their web properties, right? So that seems to be a problem that we're having these days, because if you're offering both B2B and B2C solutions, you might have different price points. You might have different product lines, and to be able to have that, proper buying experience, if a business is coming to your website, you want them to see B2B solutions. If it's a consumer, you want them to see B2C solutions. So, we're addressing that through some of our digital tools that allow you to be able to, once someone comes to your website, we can de-anonymize that traffic and let you know, hey, this is a business, maybe you should be showing them this information as opposed to the information that you would give to your typical B2C client. So, we are looking at new age ways of customers and prospect journeys with businesses, both small and large.
All right, so that brings up a good question. Is there what are the big differences between your B2B clients and your B2C clients? Are there different strategies that they are implementing, or are they pretty much specific? Or are they general across the board? Like, is there, for the people that are tuning in, that are coming from these two different industries, B2B or B2C, like what kind of differences should they be looking at, or strategies should they be looking into?
Well, all of our clients do have a B2B need. Okay, there are many that have both. So how are things looked at differently? For instance, if you're a financial services business and you offer alternative lending to both consumers and to businesses, well, you have different programs, you have different rates, you have different offerings. So you want to make sure that when you have someone who's interested, right, you've probably spent a lot of time targeting, you're spending money to buy keywords, you've optimized your search engine space. When someone actually gets to your website after you've spent all that money, you want them to have a great experience. So, that is the challenge that companies are having today. Now, you can go about this two ways. You can set up the site so the customer has to take action to say, okay, I'm going to click on something or take some action to give me a consumer journey versus a B2B journey. But how much nicer is it if you already know where that person's coming from, and you know that it's a business and can point them in the right direction? That makes someone coming into your experience, into your world where you're trying to market and sell to them, a lot more comfortable with your business. Okay,
great. All right. Well, I want to move on to our next topic, I guess you can go, like our next area. There we go. Sorry, I'm going to go backwards one. All right. The basically how to target. I found a D&B report that said that 74% of deals, sales deals, are typically awarded to sellers that are the first to provide value and insights, or at least to match benefits with the services that you offer with the services that are needed. So just as equally important as managing your data and creating a customer profile is acting quickly. To really be out there and quickly, acting or applying this data to a strategy that gets you these sales leads. Now, kind of going to skip over the first couple because I feel like we've talked about it. Looking at verticals, developing strategies that look at your current data to be able to identify leads more effectively and acting on them faster. So what I want to ask is alternative strategies. Now, of course, we can engage with Dun and Bradstreet, and they could develop these tools. But I'll start with James. But have you seen any outside of Dun and Bradstreet services, some unique strategies that your clients have used that made you kind of go, wow, I hadn't thought about actually finding leads that way or acting on leads that fast based off of the information I have. Any that you can share with our viewers right now?
Well, there are, there's a differentiation that needs to happen, when engaging with a prospect, and I think that's what a number of companies miss out on. So, if you're constantly go to market in the same way as all of your competitors, and thinking that your name, your brand, or your product is going to be the key differentiator, a lot of times my clients have found that is wrong. So from a targeting perspective, I had a financial services company that was looking for businesses that had a particular loan or lease that they were trying to acquire from that business. And what we did was we flipped the script around and said, well, let's find companies that don't have that type of loan or lease. Let's stop targeting the ones that everyone is targeting. Let's target the ones that nobody's targeting. And instead of everyone fighting over the same piece of business, they found that strategy worked and opened up a lot more doors for them.
Cool. All right, and over to Michael then. I know that you actually engage in and use Dun and Bradstreet services. Have you found anything outside of your usage of that has been unique? Again, that kind of made you, and I know, of course, you don't want to give up all your best sales leads or best sales techniques, but something that you can share with our viewers, something they can try or look into.
I think we found a couple things. The first is just like the client engagement, what James was talking about. If you offer the good client experience, they're going to be extremely happy. And word of mouth is still a very powerful thing these days. So client referrals is definitely something that happens every single day. Another thing I think that is very simple, but sometimes maybe overlooked, is what doesn't work, what's not working, right? So you either run a marketing campaign or you're doing sales outreach or anything like that, right? And everyone loves to celebrate the successes, but you also need to equally look at what hasn't worked. Why didn't this marketing campaign from this with this target audience, or why didn't this run of calls in this amount of weeks or emails, this email blast didn't work? And I think that's very important as well, because what's not working can often be just as helpful as what is.
That's actually such a good point. So what I'm hearing is, yes, data. Yes, apply data to make these decisions, but don't let go of the old school stuff either. The real person-to-person interactive, really nurturing current clients for referrals, using that word of mouth, not neglecting that. And part of that old school is also backwards looking, right? Looking at things that didn't work. So, again, I guess that comes down to the whole holistic view of this strategy. Don't get so buried in the data that you don't look at, the stuff that usually does work, nurturing issues like that. So, which is a great transition. Looking back at, when you say looking back and trying to identify what works and what doesn't work, I want to ask you now both, what kind of specific indicators, what metrics is the word I'm thinking of, metrics. What metrics do you use and apply to either your clients or within your business that help you identify, what is being effective or not? And again, I'll start with Michael this time. Like, you've done a good job over there. So what kind of KPIs or metrics, key performance indicators, or other metrics do you use to measure the effectiveness of your strategy?
I mean, there's various KPIs that you can talk to. I mean, it depends on what you're looking for, whether it's email open rate or email response rate, or win rates to a specific industry over a certain period of time. We look to many different KPIs. It kind of depends on obviously the part of the business and the various industry as well.
All right, so I know that, I don't know if this is a loaded question or not, but do you have, is there just one or two that, are at the top of your list that you look at on a daily basis, that are, are really standing out for you that you then take back to your sales team and go, look, this isn't helping or this isn't working. What's going on with this particular metrics right now?
Yeah, definitely. I can speak to one for definitely that's actually very actionable for our outbound sales development team. Is honestly is the activity, right? Is calls, emails, doing outbound activity, off their verticalized accounts that they're given, right? So, obviously someone's not getting a certain amount of opportunity set up, something like that. The first thing you want to do is look at, okay, what's their activity on a daily basis look like? If it's good enough, great, let's talk about maybe the talk track or something like that. If it's not, then it's like, okay, well, here's a very glaringly obvious solution. Let's try doing a few more activities. So that's one. I would say, there's a few. I'm not going to dive too deep into this one. It's just more of a sales leadership kind of KPI, but sales velocity is a very new and up and coming thing to look at. It can be measured. It's just very interesting to look at and kind of gives you how you're going to do for the rest of the year. And as well as
how are you measuring velocity?
Sure. I'll give you, if you give me, I'll give you the actual. So sales velocity is basically your opportunities times your average deal value times your win rate divided by the length, your average length of sale. So it's a very heavy data metrics driven number and KPI, but essentially you want the higher the sales velocity, the better.
Okay, that does seem very specific.
It's very specific. It's very but from what we've seen, win rates, the traditional KPIs, win rates, percent to goal, things like that are really helpful still.
Gotcha. Okay, so James, Michael comes at this from a specific company strategy. Are you dealing with a bunch of different clients across a bunch of different industries? Do you see any common KPIs, key performance or metrics that companies use, or do you see this being a very, very laser focused niche area that companies focus on individually?
Well, I mean, there's really something that is across all companies and industries that's important. I think Michael spoke to it is, optimizing sales activity. That comes in a number of different forms. And, one of the big drivers or big things that I keep on talking to customers about is, speed to lead, right? So what is that? So we know that there's so much information and content that's driving prospects into into white papers and web forums. And, once someone actually raises their hand and their information becomes available, how long does that information take, and how complete is it when it lands on a salesperson's desk to actually make the outreach and engage with the customer? Okay, so there's a lot of statistics that say that if it takes any more than 5 minutes, then you might as well not even follow up and call. Or if it takes more than an hour, so most sales leads take 3 days to get from somebody raising their hand to being called. And I don't know if everyone on this is like me. I don't remember what I did 15 minutes ago or an hour ago. So if I raise my hand and I'm interested in something now, 3 days from now, I might not even remember it. So that is something that's really important to my customers and something that we assist them with every day.
Yeah, not only that, but in 3 days you've raised your hand 50 different times too. So,
right.
Yeah, just the amount of data your customer is engaging and can get overwhelming. So, Mike, I want to switch back real quick to you. We have a question asking you if you could first say again the formula for velocity, and maybe just clarify when you would use it or how you would apply it.
Sure. Sure. Sales velocity, and for everyone, if you want, like after the webinar is over, you can certainly Google it. It's a very prominent thing, but it's your number of opportunities times your average deal value times your win rate. So you take that number and you divide it by the length of your average length of sales. So, James was just previously talking on your lead to, the time that you're talking to people and everything like that. So length of sale is another KPI I wanted to actually add to the list of very important things that we track. The shorter the time period, the better, because as soon as you start talking to a client, you obviously want them to close as fast as possible, but the longer they linger, studies have shown that more likely they're going to drop off and never become a customer.
Yeah, I totally, and I fall right into that category too. So, all right, yeah, gosh, it's so funny. I would love to talk about KPIs because I believe that it's just so much into measuring, and if you are using data, then there's no reason why you can't be producing metrics, on a minute-to-minute basis that show you how well you're doing. But again, maybe that's a different webinar. Maybe that's not. We could probably spend an entire hour on that. So we are getting some questions, and we're coming right up on the 15-minute mark. So I want to move into the question and answer part. But before I do, again, I want to thank our sponsor, Dun and Bradstreet, for sponsoring this webinar. It's great. It's an awesome way to give back to the community and sales to small businesses everywhere. I also want to thank our guests. Michael, you brought up a good point that if you have a question or you want to follow up more, put the question in the sidebar. If we don't get to it, then at least the speakers will receive it and they could reach out to you separately. I do want to say that Dun & Bradstreet has offered all of our viewers here a special deal. We've got a couple of questions asking specifically about the stuff that James does and the products that James offers, and we could probably spend a lot of time on that. So instead, Dun & Bradstreet is offering a special for anybody that's on this webinar right now. If you want to receive more information on how to generate better leads, on better sales intelligence, then type a 1 into the sidebar into your question area, and what you will receive, Dun & Bradstreet will reach out to you afterwards, and you'll receive a free trial of Dun & Bradstreet Hoovers. If you'd like to get a better understanding of, you have a bunch of data and you want to find out how clean, complete, and accurate your sales data is, then type a number 2, and Dun & Bradstreet will offer you a free analysis of the quality of your data and a custom calculation of its impact on your bottom line, like a potential ROI of it. So type in a number 2, and then at the end of the webinar, once the webinar concludes, your information will be passed on to Dun & Bradstreet, and they will reach out to you with these free offerings. So there's no obligation. They're completely free just for being here. Thank you very much. And you can request both of them if you want. You can type in a 1 and a 2, and then they'll reach out to you afterwards. All right, so with that said, let's move on to some questions. One of the questions I saw pop up earlier, which I think is very effective because it kind of speaks to me, is there are people that are on this webinar right now who work in offices with people who may not embrace data and the impact that data can have on a sales team as much as we do. Perhaps they're just a little bit more apprehensive, perhaps they're intimidated by all the data, or perhaps they're older like me and they just believe in the old school way is the way to go. And I'll start off with Michael. I don't know if you've had this issue in your business or in other business that you worked in, but how do you convince management and other team members to embrace this and put the resources and financial investment into operating on a strategy like this?
I'd say it's a couple ways. The first way, you kind of want to carefully navigate that talk track of what's becoming industry standard, right? I'm not, whatever business you're in, whatever industry you're in, today technology is fully integrated with most businesses, and if you're working on something or working with something that's maybe 10 to 15 years standard practice 10 to 15 years ago, then maybe you aren't up to what the industry standards are today. And it's easy to also show a use case for something when you can provide the outcomes. Kind of going back to the beginning of what I said at the beginning of the webinar is, if you have great outcomes, people tend to be responsive to those as well.
All right. James, based off of the fact that you have 20 plus years of business experience, I'm going to lump you, rightly or wrongly so, into my age group. So what has your experience been? Now you are actually implementing and selling sales tools that revolve around data. What kind of pushback have you gotten from management, and how have you overcome them?
Well, I think it's really important to look at how we're buying in our personal lives, and how things are going in the world, as opposed to just looking at it from a pure B2B selling perspective. So at any given moment now, you can pick up a phone and order a car, which is something you couldn't do several years ago. You can have any grocery item delivered to your house within 2 hours without having to get into your car. So, that type of immediacy is really important in our world today. And, if we're not going to be part of the revolution of using online tools and having a great buyer's experience as a company that's, selling B2B solutions, then we're going to be missing the boat, because that's the expectation of the market for all consumers, whether they're buying B2B or B2C.
All right. Awesome. Well, so with that said, and I think that speaks to a lot of people listening in. With that said, and I'll go back to James first, but what is one actionable item that the people that are tuning in right now should do? Like the step, because you've got the holistic view, a lot of different things you can do. What's the one thing you would tell a client to do, or these viewers to do right off the bat?
Well, I think we've harped on it, pretty well, is to, know your business first, segment your markets properly, don't guess, right? So make sure you know the industries, the businesses that you're already successful with before looking to grow in any other direction. I have many companies who assume that they're doing business in these particular states and industries and types of companies, and analysis shows that if we had gone and targeted the types of businesses that they thought they were doing business with, then they would be highly unsuccessful.
All right. Michael, you have anything to add to that?
I think James said it perfectly right there. It's, nothing more I could add. It's doing the things simple way.
You can't add to perfection. There you go, James. Well, it's a great transition to my next question, though. Okay, so, it's a great tip. So, look at your data, make sure you fully understand a strategy, like develop a strategy, develop your goals, develop your strategy, making sure that you're looking at the data the right way. One of the questions we have is, what about a startup company? What about a startup company that doesn't have data, or has limited data, or has identified a product or service that they want to launch and have an idea of a customer that they want to go for? What recommendations do you have to them to get started to make sure that they're integrating data correctly?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, James. Michael, I'll go back. I'll go back to you first, Michael, and then James.
Sure. I think it, kind of brings down to my point is, identifying your internal needs. What's on a day-to-day basis, like what's, questions you're asking, things that you need to be answered from your employees that are in your CRM or your LMS or whatever database or whatever tool you're working out of. And then, making sure that they have the right options available to pick, or the right workflow, making sure things are just, organized. Everyone's on the same page. It's very simple to start building all sorts of custom things within any sort of tool, but making sure your sales process or your marketing process is aligned with what you have in your system.
Okay. So, in having dealt with a lot of startups myself, I often see that entrepreneurs try to tackle everything themselves, but in reality, they're focused on their product, they're focused on developing their product. So, perhaps bringing in an expert, or, being willing to write into their business plan that we are going to bring in an expert to help us formulate this right off the bat is important. James, for you, let me ask it this way. So, Again, for startups who have maybe identified a target market or a target audience, whether it's B2B or B2C, do you, in order to get data, I mean, do you recommend buying troves of data to analyze? Do you recommend doing surveys? Like, how should a company start to make sure that their product is even targeted, or they've identified the right target market for their product in a startup situation?
So I've been fortunate enough to work with many startups, several unicorns, and I've seen things go well, and I've seen things go kind of poorly, right? So the acquiring massive amounts of data to go forward is a strategy that has not worked. So I would say two things. I would say test small markets first, test different media, use email, mail, online, social, see what works better, see what combinations of things work better. And the second thing, as I would say, is develop really good habits up front. So there are many companies that acquire data from 5, 6 organizations. It ends up in their CRM and their workflows, and there is no governance or maintenance strategy for that data. And then once they hit a certain level of maturity, they look back in time and say, oh no, we have old data that is multi-sourced and incomplete, and we probably should have come up with a maintenance strategy up front, rather than just a hyper growth top line strategy to begin with.
Okay. Yeah, I forget, you probably have worked with a lot of startups. That's a tough position to be in when you don't know exactly who you're targeting or you're not sure about it. So, great tips. So, looks like we're coming up right toward the end here. Let me ask both of you one more question. I'll start with James here. Now, we are collecting a bunch of information for Dun and Bradstreet. Of course, we want them to look at Dun and Bradstreet. But do you have any other, like, if somebody wanted to learn more about Dun and Bradstreet tools, webinars, websites, where can they go to learn more about it?
Sure. So, dnb.com is a great place to start. We have a sales and marketing section dedicated on the site, and for all parts of the different buyers' journeys. Our D&B Hoover solution is something that many entrepreneurs and startup companies start with. And we have, as Michael and Credly have, we've built an entire ecosystem around Salesforce.com. So many customers that have Salesforce.com are using D&B for both data maintenance, prospecting, as well as business intelligence within their ecosystem. So that is the Salesforce App Exchange for D&B Solutions is always a great place to go as well.
Gotcha. And we didn't even hit on CRMs or customer relationship manager apps and softwares that businesses are using in addition to, and again, that's probably an entire different webinar. But I'm going to close out with Michael. One more question for you. Now you do use you've got your own CRM, and you've got you use a host of the Dun and Bradstreet services. But for our viewers here, what kind of, where do you go to learn more, to get more information that you can recommend that viewers, the people that are tuned in here, can go and check out and learn more?
I have to say, when I was searching for, specifically a tool for firmographic data, for company data, for things like that, which Dun and Bradstreet offers, I just started Googling, and their name kept popping up. And there's a reason why, certain companies, when you Google certain things, they keep popping up. And I have to say, my experience from start to where we are today with Dun and Bradstreet, has been phenomenal. Everyone, our account manager Bonnie's been great. I think there's plenty of community boards out there that are very open, willing to help. It's the power of connectivity today. So honestly, just from personal and professional experience, don't be afraid to reach out, whether it's about various tools or best practices. I find often that people are often more willing to help than not.
Awesome. Okay, well, that brings us to the 1 hour mark. So everybody on the East Coast, it's time to go back to work. I do want to thank again our sponsor, Dun and Bradstreet, and a huge shout out and thanks to Michael and James. I appreciate you guys taking the time to educate everybody that tuned in. If you this is your last chance. If you have a last question, just kind of type it over to the side, or if you want to take advantage of that Dun and Bradstreet special, type in 1 or 2, and somebody from this webinar will follow up with you. Otherwise, you can reach out to Michael, James, or myself at on LinkedIn. Connect with us there, and if you have any specific questions for any of us, we'd be happy to connect and reach with you there. So, and lastly, thank you to Entrepreneur also for powering this webinar and keeping us involved. For all you tuning in, this link will be sent out to all of you. So if you want to re-listen to it or catch some specific details, you'll be able to do so. With that said, thank you again, and I hope and look forward to seeing you at our next webinar in the future. Bye.